This video is brought to you by CoolStuffInc.com and GatheringMagic.com, your place to explore the game.
Hi everyone, I'm the Kaka Storm from General Damage Control. We're here today to do a quick deck tech with Commander decks at Gen Con 2015. I'd like to show you guys my 5-colour Child of Alara Lands Matter list. So I've got a bit of colour fixing for the mana base through here. Can be done with other things apart from jewels. I just like to play with my toys. Most of my background is actually a vintage player. I do like to run quite a few sack lands in EDH, especially in this particular list. Mostly because it gets me extra landfall triggers, but you guys will see what that's all about later on. Verge, as you know, is a fantastic tutor because it just pulls up multiple lands at the same time, so extra efficient. Riftstone Portal, not something I've ever actually really seen anyone else packing, but I mean, there are ways to get lands in the graveyard, and this one helps you fix things, and green is super important to this list. Again, we're going through a bit more colour fixing. As generally speaking, about a 5-colour list, the stabilisation is super important. We've got things that turn sack lands on as well. That just helps. Here we have our first relevant part of the deck. Because we're basically a permanent base deck, Altar the Brood is super efficient. It just drops so many mill triggers on the stack at a time. It has been known to actually win games just off Altar the Brood. As you'll notice, we now actually have some Guildgates. You probably noticed we weren't running all the dual lands. There's a reason for that. Guildgates are taking up a lot of their spots. There's actually a full complement of the Return to Ravnica Guildgates in there, so all 10 of them. Slightly falling those out. The reason for that, of course, we are playing a Lands Matter list. So what I actually wanted to do was actually initiate the Maze's End kill, which is not as easy as you might think, but is definitely nowhere near as hard as you would otherwise think, especially when you are getting that many land drops a turn in. The deck has multiple kills as well. This particular one does have an Inkmoth Nexus kill. So to support that, I've got obviously Inkmoth, Blinkmoth. I've got a Deserted Temple to now allow me to re-trigger the Blinkmoth boost there as well, or potentially even do other things with it, but mostly it's there for making a very, very large Inkmoth Nexus. Cathedral of War, Exalted is just fantastic. It just gives you that extra bit of clip which you can get through. And if you have enough land drops, you can potentially use multiple Blinkmoths and those sort of things, or even potentially clone the Cathedral of War as well. Sometimes you just need to get things through. There's a few things in the deck that I really want to get through, but Rogue's Passage is a fantastic utility land for that, for anyone who hasn't actually run it before. High Market, if you remember, we're using Child of Alara as our general for this particular list, and sometimes you just need to blow up the world. As I'm very fond of saying, this is my boomstick, there are many like it, but this one is mine. Raging Ravine is another fantastic one. It's not something I see a huge amount of being played with. We get factories and Mutavaults and the occasional Celestial Colonnade. I love Raging Ravine in this particular case because it gets bigger every time it gets through. It's stronger, harder, faster, and this thing's won games for me. It's brilliant, this list. Shifting on to some control elements here. At the end of the day, sometimes you just need to blow up that Gaea's Cradle or something else. Because we are playing a Lands Matter list, I've got to have something. So I do have the Wasteland and the Strip Mine to tactically remove things. We're also running a Bog. I mean, if you're not running a Bog and you have access to black, why, honestly? We need to recognise there's a hell of a lot of things we need to take out in the graveyard these days. My favourite bit of tech in this particular deck, and I know it's not going to be for everyone, when I first got into the EDH format, I wanted to play a deck that actually ran Tabernacle. And the question I asked myself, and this was what actually inspired this list, is how many Tabernacles can I find a way to get into play at a time? And what I stumbled across was this little gem, Mirror Gallery. As you can see here, it eliminates Legend Rule. So I'll flip back to Tabernacle for a second. Obviously, Legendary Land, we remove that, we can start copying that. And we've got, straight off the bat, Vesuva, and of course, Thespian Stage, when that... Sorry, gentlemen, the ladies. There we go. And that allows us to get at least 3 Tabernacles into play at a time. Obviously, there are ways we could push for further, but I mean, paying 3 for each creature is pretty harsh. Moving into a tutor package now. This is really designed to enable the deck, basically fishing out the bits and pieces that it just needs to accelerate and stabilise. Some of the universal tutors, some of them are fairly specific. They're basically designed to fish out the mirror galleries and the specific lands I need, and any other land accelerants, such as Zeus's and those sort of things, which you'll see soon. Reap and Sow is another fantastic one I don't see a huge amount of, which again allows me tactical removal of problematic things, while also tinkering fun toys like Tabernacle. Universal tutors, of course. Crop rotation, I mean, Tabernacle at instant speed when your opponent's least expecting it. Beautiful thing. And we don't really care about loss of land in this deck because they're going to come back anyway. There's so many ways to get things back. Realms Uncharted is another beautiful thing that I saw many years ago when Rise of Eldrazi first came out. And I looked at that and went, that has got to find a home somewhere. And I've been searching for years to try to find a place where Realms could actually do some serious damage. And I did look at Legacy Lands, which was the original inspiration for this particular list, just wanting to port decks over from Vintage and Legacy to EDH in a fun way. And given we've got a deck with 50 plus lands in it, why not? Let's go fish some things up and have some carnage. Okay, Expedition Map, as we know, it's going to do the job. And of course, Teleria West, of course, the tutor land itself. This is amazing in this deck, because so much of this deck is land. All the business end of this deck is land. It literally will go... This is functionally a blue demonic tutor. Okay, so we have the acceleration end now. Obviously, what the classics like Exploration... we have Dark Tutelage, which many may not actually be familiar with. But this one is essentially an enchantment version of Bob, or Dark Confidant for those not familiar with that particular term. For one more, it's an enchantment. It does function the same thing, obviously lack of power and toughness, but given that this is a lands list, we're not wanting to have vulnerable, easy to kill creatures floating around. In this particular case, especially since we also run Tabernacle, I kind of want to be able to accelerate out from under my own Tabernacle. And because the land content is so high, it's absolutely fine to run this and just accelerate yourself out. Other acceleration elements I want to use here are Rites of Flourishing for the Hallowed Mine and the Exploration effect. And Into the Wilds. This is another good one you guys probably may not be familiar with. It's similar to Dark Tutelage in the sense of it's kind of like a Bob. In this particular case, what it does is it flips up the top card. If it's a land, it goes straight into play. Otherwise, it does nothing. But I mean, this deck is so heavy in lands that it's functionally going to give you a Bob every turn. Well, most turns. Amulet of Vigor is also another fantastic acceleration point. We all know how that works from the modern decks, Bloom Tender, those sort of things. With the Guildgates in this deck, putting a lot of things into play tapped, it just helps to stabilise the deck. It also allows some other shenanigans later on as well. Alright, so more of controlling elements here. Storm Cauldron may not be a card you're all familiar with, but this is a little number I stumbled across quite a few years ago there as well. As you can see, it does have an exploration effect on there for the extra land drop, and that's a universal exploration. But it has a bit of a drawback in the sense that whenever a land is tapped for mana, now specifically tapping for mana here, it causes the land to bounce. This does a number of things. It allows me to potentially tactically bounce lands out to then replay them with multiple land drops, which I can use to cause mass landfall effects. But it also helps with the Tabernacle in the sense that whenever my opponents are trying to pay for all their creatures, they have to lose their lands, which means next turn they probably can't. Which does mean that it gives the deck a very solid form of defense. Obviously I'm running Mana Bond for two reasons. Obviously I want to just dump my lands into play, but in combination with the Storm Cauldron, it just means I can freely bounce my lands and re-drop at the end of turn, and I don't have to worry about that at all. Makes the Storm Cauldron kind of asymmetrical at that point. Moving on to another fantastic little favourite here. I have seen a few Horns of Greed this Gen Con weekend, but we don't have a huge number of them back home in Australia. Obviously, this is essentially going to get massive amounts of extra land draws there for you, specifically only when you play a land, but the idea here is this is a lands deck, it is feeding itself. I'm quite happy for my opponents to have the occasional extra draw card, but I'm drawing 3 or 4 turn off this thing. It is just literally insane. Okay, now this little gem is part of why I am running the Amulet of Vigor. For anyone who's familiar with Patron of the Moon and its land drop shenanigans, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But for those who don't, let's take a close look at the final clause here. I'll just move this a little closer to the camera. So the final clause is that you can pay 1 and put up to 2 land cards from your hand into play tapped. And there's a couple of cards in the deck that do allow you to essentially return lands from play to your hand, specifically Ghost Town, and I'll get to that one in a moment. But the idea here is that we can essentially find another way to dump a whole pile of land from our hand into play at a moment's notice. So massive acceleration there. Also, it's a big beat stick, and that's been able to win games. As you'd expect, Oracle, the usual sort of extra land drops and those sort of things. Nothing special there. Metamorphs and Clever Imposters are just universally good for helping pull things out. I don't normally advocate playing Prophet of Kufrix. In this particular deck it's actually good, given that we are bouncing lands and doing all sorts of shenanigans with them, with the lands and Mana Bond. So Prophet actually has been valuable here. It doesn't see a lot of the abuse that a lot of Prophet-based decks do, which is why I don't normally advocate its use. But this particular deck, I actually am fine with playing it. Zuran Orb. Now, we all know what Zuran Orb does. Nothing special here. Obviously, we are dropping land for life. And at the end of the day, sometimes you just need to sack a bunch of land. In the case that you do have to sack a bunch of land, one of the really cool tricks I like to do is, especially when my opponents are tapped out or with the Besiege you saw earlier, I'll quite happily sack my entire land base to Zuran Orb for 20, 30 life, and then promptly Faith's Reward to get that all back. Free 50 life? Yes, please. Moving further into the defense of this particular deck, as you can tell, I'm not running a huge amount of creatures here. And I need to be able to survive through attacks and aggro swarms and token hordes. Peacekeeper is a little gem from Weatherlight that I've loved for years, and I've basically cornered the market back in my hometown of Peacekeepers. Simply stopping the attack step from ever happening? Yes, please, I'll take that any day of the week. Where I can't, we always get Glacial Chasms, we know how that works. Core Haven, and a selection of various maze effects. Just helps you just get out there, and you can play some tactical moves in terms of political plays, like, oh, it's okay, I'll protect you from this, and those sort of things, and see what other people will do to not necessarily kill you off if you're kind of stopping them dying. Island of Whack Whack is another one of those specific mazes that you don't see very often. This one is a very old card from, I'm trying to remember, it's from Arabian Nights. It just stops flies, but obviously, big flies are a problem in the format, so it's handy to have. Moving on to some of my recursion tricks and acceleration tricks. Deadbridge Chant. Now, you do see this occasionally in Jared Lichlord decks, which is great. But I think it actually has a lot more application in many decks than what really is often seen, given what it does. And as we know, this card dumps a whole pile of stuff into your graveyard, which, sure, this is a risk about if you get bogged or cryptid or relicked out of the game. But for something that's going to give you extra pieces into play, extra cards into hand when you sorely need it, and potentially even just randomly recurring something that's useful, I don't think anything else really beats this card in terms of what it can potentially do. If you leave this thing alone, it is going to be a point of pain. Kiora, of course, generates extra card draws, a bit of defense and extra land drops, so just universally useful. My signature EDH card, of course, is the Time Twister, but it's there mostly to reload hands, prevent being milled out, the usual sort of shenanigans. Life from the Loam. This one is more synonymous with dredge style lists, and it is definitely a key piece from the Legacy Lands decks, which use that to get back their cycling lands and Talaria West and those sort of things. Life is just a fantastic way for me to get out of a corner spot or start filling up my graveyard for mass recursion and those sort of things. Think of it as a big acceleration point. Elixir is also another anti-mill tactic. Allows me to reload and try to defend against bogs and those sort of things if I got it in play. Gets a bit of life at the drop of a hat, but it's just a handy tool to have in these sort of decks. Crucible, we're playing a Lance list, obviously we've got to have a Crucible in there. It just does so many jobs there with getting things back as you need them, when you need them. You think you've got rid of something, no, Crucible's going to get that back. If Crucible can't get it back, if someone's gone ahead and done that horrible thing where they just remove it from the game, our best buddy here, Rift Sweeper, is just a useful tool. We can literally go and fetch anything back. There is nothing out of my reach, people. I will get things and they will come back. Eternal Witness, of course, just fetching back other things that I can't normally get. Fantastic tool. You can combine that with Vorath's Stronghold, as you know, and you can potentially regrowth every turn. Just a useful tool, much better than regrowth in this particular sort of scenario. Titania again does two jobs here for us. It gives us a quick recursion for a shot with land, and it also gives us a win condition in the sense of I'll quite happily just zero in a whole bunch of lands out, or even my tabernacles, and go for gold. You might as well if it's there. It just does so many jobs. The Vorath's Stronghold, of course, again going back to the Eternal Witness, it just gets Zeus's back, Eternal Witnesses, Patron of the Moons, Titania's. The bits and pieces, the few creatures I actually have, I really want to have, so it's going to help me there. Academy Ruins is basically doing the same sort of job for my Horns of Greed and other toys that just need to be back in play. Petrified Field, here's one you don't see every day. It's kind of similar to Volraths and Academy Ruins in the sense that this particular gem is going to pull me a land back. So just think of it that way. That's really what its job is. Almost done now. We've of course got Ob Nixilis. This is going back to the Mana Bond and the Patron of the Moon here. Sorry about that, boys and girls. So this particular card, I'll just zoom it in a little here for us. As we can see here, this runs landfall. Now, we know how landfall works. In this particular case, it does a couple of different things. It makes Ob Nixilis himself rather large and quite unpleasant for the swing, which a quick Rogue's Passage is going to help that get through. But it also allows us to chip through opposing defences like Glacial Chasms and Maze of Iths for the life loss. We can quite happily generate very huge numbers of land drops and landfall triggers in a single turn. So an Ob Nixilis isn't just this is going to grind the game out. It is very much a case of this could quite possibly end the game here right now. And Ghost Town is a great way to actually help engineer that, because Ghost Town has a quite unusual ability here. I'll just zoom him up here for you as well. Okay, so Ghost Town, as you can see here, doesn't tap for coloured, but the main interesting point here is its zero ability that allows you to return it to the owner's hand so you can play it again on your next turn. Does a couple of jobs in combination with Horn of Greed. This allows us to essentially create a ad hoc draw engine, but also allows us to get extra landfall triggers with Ob Nixilis at a stretch if we need to. It also is the key card to combine with Patron of the Moon if we need to drop in a whole pile of land at a moment's notice. We can literally pull it up and drop it back down again and create a functional infinite land drop loop there at instant speed. Undiscovered Paradise does a similar sort of job. It's not as freely able to bounce, but it does bounce at least once, and it does tap for coloured mana, which is handy. And we of course have Scape Shift here now. We know how Scape Shift works. Grab our lands, sacrifice and replace. So in the case of Ob Nixilis, if you can get rid of, say, 5 or 6 lands, or even 10 lands or 12 lands, and replace with another 12 lands, which you know your deck will have, because there is 50 plus lands in here, that's a heck of a lot of Ob Nixilis triggers. I mean, 10 triggers is 30 life there, 13, 14 triggers, that's a dead player there. Plus you can go for the swing under the Rogue's Passage and take it a secondary player. Scape Shift is just literally insane. Finally, we have, from actually the Origins set, Animus Awakening. So I'll zoom this one in here for anyone who's not been following the game recently. This one allows you to pay green and X, and allows you to reveal the top X cards of your library and essentially put all the land cards in play. So it's sort of like a land-centric Genesis wave. But given what we're trying to do here is spill a whole pile of lands in, this card is fantastic both early game and late game. Late game you can dig fairly deep, or early game, because of the high number of lands in the deck, you'll probably guaranteed to hit 2 or 3 if you can get 4, 5, 6 mana in there, and you can really accelerate yourself to quite a dangerous position with Animus Awakening.
Thanks for watching, everyone. Please don't forget to subscribe and favourite CMDR decks, and also check us out at the Kaka Storm on Twitter as well.